month's webinar, which is all about family-friendly rights and an insight into all the options that are available. So before we start, we just want to introduce ourselves. And for those of you who have not joined any of our previous webinars, I'm Victoria Templeton and I'm one of the HR Knowledge Managers here at HR Solutions. And today I'm pleased to say that we're joined by Abby Ashford, our HR consultant, or one of our HR consultants, who will be supporting in today's webinar and help field any questions and answers at the end. We're also supported this morning by Rebecca, who should be in the background to deal with any technical issues should they arise. And because we have many of you who have joined us today, we've had to place you all on mute. However, we do want to hear your questions. And so we will be taking questions at the end. Please let us know if you have any, and you can do this by noting them in the question box that's available to you. Here's a quick guide to show you how to do that. So you will have a GoToWebinar panel on your screen that should look something like this. Please type your questions in the questions pane and we'll aim to read out and answer as many as we can at the end. Now, we also want to make this session as interactive as we would normally do at our physical events. So there will be a few polls to begin with. And so when you see this poll screen, you just select the answers that's appropriate for you. Please note though that to be able to participate in the polls, you'll need to ensure that your screen isn't in the full screen mode, as for some reason GoToWebinar doesn't allow you to vote when you're in full screen. So without further ado, we're going to begin today's webinar. And here's a look at what we shall cover today. And the first part is really looking through all the existing family-friendly leave entitlements. And once we've shared our insights, we'll then also look at the flexible working. And although it's not a leave entitlement per se, it's still important to consider this when discussing statutory arrangements that an employee may be entitled to. And then we'll bring our webinar to a close by looking at what we can expect to see in the future when it comes to family-friendly rights. And we'll take your questions after that. So to begin with, we're going to run a few polls. So I'd be grateful if you could answer these. And the first question that I'm going to launch is the question about pay. And do you enhance statutory pay relating to any of the family-friendly leave policies? And I'll keep the voting open for a while. Still a few more votes coming in. And I'm going to close that poll. And I'm going to share the results. So wow, so 58% of you do actually enhance the pay element regarding family friendly, and that's really fantastic. 42% of you offer the statutory element only, and I guess that's quite an interesting statistic. Perhaps that surprises me in a way. Don't know about you, Abby.
Yeah, that's higher than I would have thought, actually, 58%, and really, really encouraging. I know a lot of the clients that we work with have wanted to enhance over the last year, and especially with all the different recruitment difficulties at the moment, people are really having to look at what benefits they use to attract people at the moment.
Absolutely, it's definitely a good retention benefit, isn't it? And help recruitment as well. So that's really interesting. Thank you for that. I'm now going to launch the second poll. And this is about flexible working. And do you offer flexible working from day one? This is looking fairly interesting, the statistics. Oh, this is a good statistic. We've got a few more to vote. And I think we're about there, a few more voting. And I'm going to think that's it. So I'm going to close the poll and I'm going to share the results. And that was really fascinating. So 52% do and 48% don't. And for a while it was 50-50, which we've never had before as an outcome. So that's why I was sort of fascinated with that. So yeah, so that's really good to hear actually as well, that you know, you recognise that of the benefit you can add to a business for flexible working, and actually going above the statutory by offering it from day one. Does that surprise you, Abby, or from your
Yeah,
experiences?
it really does actually. And again, the fact that 52% of employers are on this poll offering it from day one is so good to see. And again, I'm not surprised in one way, because people and employers are having to be, you know, really mindful about what do people want from that work-life balance. And it's one of the few things, isn't it, now in terms of benefits where employees have to wait a certain amount of time. Lots of things are from day one. And at the moment, I know you're going to come on to this later, Victoria, about when flexible working might kick in the future, but at the moment it isn't from day one. So the fact that some employers are doing it, I think is really good actually.
Yeah, and definitely in terms of the recruitment market and attracting it, that's such a massive benefit. So yeah, so thank you for that. And we're going to run our final poll here. So let's just hide that and call up the third poll, which is about understanding what experience you all have in terms of managing the various forms of family-friendly leave. So it is multiple choice. So which of the following do you have experience in managing? It'll just be helpful for the rest of the webinar to have that understanding. Okay, we'll just keep it open a little bit longer. Then I think I'll close that now. So let's share those results. Yeah, so 71% of you have the experience in managing maternity, and that probably doesn't come as a surprise to me. It's one of the most more common policies to manage from a family friendly, as well as time off for dependents. The shared parental leave, actually 6%. That's interesting, because I actually would have thought that would be in lower. It's not generally a popular form of family friendly leave, in my experience. I don't know about you, Abby.
No, that's right. Paternity leave I would have expected to have been higher, but then at the same time, there are so many people that don't take paternity leave if it isn't enhanced. They prefer to take annual leave because you get full pay, as opposed to statutory paternity pay, if that's all that it is. Yeah, I'd expect to see adoption leave lower. Maternity leave that high, yes, absolutely. But yeah, shared parental leave, that's the one that makes us HR people twitch a little bit, because it's so complicated. So when those requests come in, we tend to go, oh God, oh no.
Let's just get familiar with it again.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you for that. They were all interesting statistics, and thanks for your comments, Abby. So let's hide that and carry on with the webinar. So what I thought we would do is obviously look at all the current family-friendly related leave options that we have, your employees may have a statutory entitlement to, obviously provided they meet the applicable eligibility criteria. So these are the areas that we're going to be covering today. And but really, to set the scene or the context, I thought it'd be quite useful to let you know about all the different pieces of employment legislation that we have that deals with all the various forms of family-friendly leave. As you can see, there are many forms of legislation, different years that they've become implemented. And I suppose the one thing I would say is, your company policies, that you'll have in place will be making sure that you're complying with all of these different pieces of legislation. So I guess on a day-to-day basis, by following your policies and procedures, you're working to the legislation, aren't you? So don't worry about having to remember all the different names and the years, but I just thought from a context point of view, it's quite helpful to see what is out there. And all I'd say is just make sure that you follow your policies and act consistently when you're managing them. So moving on, we're going to be looking at now somebody's entitlement when it comes to adoption. So we're going to be looking at adoption and maternity now, and these two can generally be grouped together because in essence it's about having that period of time off when you're having a baby or adopting a child, and there are many similarities between the entitlements. But if we look at adoption first, and this entitles eligible employees to take up to a total of 52 weeks leave. Now, it can be taken by employees regardless of their length of service, so it is a day one right of employment. To qualify, though, the employee must be the adopter of a child aged up to 18 years, and they must have notified the adoption agency that the child should be placed with them on the date of placement. In terms of the adoption rights, then where a couple adopts a child jointly, then only one person may take the adoption leave. However, the other person may take paternity leave or shared parental leave. And with adoption pay, this is dependent on meeting certain eligibility criteria. And the statutory pay element for adoption is your first 6 weeks are 90% of the employee's normal weekly earnings. And then between weeks 7 and 39, the remaining pay period is either 90% of the average weekly earnings or the statutory flat level of £151.97, whichever is the lower. And when we look at maternity leave, this statutory entitlement entitles pregnant employees to take up to, again, 52 weeks, and that's regardless of the length of service. Maternity leave can't begin before the beginning of the 11th week before the expected week of childbirth. Obviously, unless the employee gives birth prematurely, of course. Now, pay is dependent on meeting certain eligibility criteria again, and if an employee isn't entitled to the statutory maternity pay element, then they may be able to claim a maternity allowance directly through the government. Pregnant employees are entitled to take paid time off to attend antenatal care, and qualifying employees are also entitled to take unpaid time off on 2 occasions to accompany a pregnant woman to antenatal care. And that particular guidance got introduced a few years back, and it says up to sort of something like 6.5 hours each for those 2 occasions. And we also have the statutory maternity rate, which what you'll probably see a theme as we go through. The first 6 weeks, 90% of normal weekly earnings, and then weeks 7 through to 39, the remaining paid period of the maternity period is £151.97, or the 90% of average weekly earnings, again, whichever is lower. So we're now going to look at the shared parental leave. And as we've just hinted a moment ago, this is probably one of the most complex areas of family-friendly leave. And from my experience, it's probably one of the least utilised. Obviously, some of you have experience of using it, which is good to hear. But I just want to spend some time explaining more about what this is. So an employee who is on maternity or adoption leave can actually make a decision to share their leave. So obviously they're entitled to that 52 weeks. Now, in order to do it, the maternity or the adoption leave must officially come to an end. And then the remaining weeks of that person's leave is converted to shared parental leave. Now, the leave can be changed to shared parental leave at any time in that 52-week period, apart from the first 2 weeks, or 4 in the case of factory workers, because we have what's called compulsory maternity leave. And the 2 weeks compulsory maternity leave is there for health and safety reasons. You know, so for maternity leave, you cannot come back to work, end your maternity leave during that period. Shared parental leave can be made up to 3 separate requests for leave, and each block must be a minimum of 1 week. But it can be agreed otherwise, and it can start on any day of the week. Now, pay for this is dependent again on shared on eligibility criteria. So in terms of the pay, the shared parental leave pay period, as I said, doesn't exceed that 39 weeks. The shared parental leave pay is the flat statutory rate. So again, you'll see the similarities. So it's 90% of the average weekly earnings, if that's lower than the flat statutory rate, whichever is lower. And then if the mother or primary adopter does not qualify for either SMP or SAP, then their partner will not be eligible for shared parental leave pay. So it's probably one of those that isn't used much. It can get very complicated in managing, because people can have the various blocks where they're swapping between maternity leave and the shared parental leave. And I know there's some good flow charts and guidance on the government website to help employers manage through it. And my advice is just take it a stage at a time, and the onus is on pretty much the employee that's either on maternity or adoption leave, because it's them making the decision to end that leave and transfer it to the shared parental leave. So now we move on to the paternity leave element of family friendly. And this entitles eligible employees to take up to 2 weeks leave to look after a child, normally immediately upon the birth of a child. It can be taken either as 1 single week leave or 2 consecutive weeks, but it must be taken up to the 8 weeks after the date of birth, or placement with the new adoptive parents for adoption within the UK, or any date of entry into the UK for overseas adoptions. Now, it can't be taken as odd days. And again, as with all the others, pay is dependent on meeting certain eligibility criteria. And this is why perhaps what Abby was saying earlier, you know, the statutory element, quite often employees prefer to take holiday because they get their normal pay. But from a statutory paternity pay perspective, they have to meet that certain eligibility criteria. The employee must have a minimum of 26 weeks service, and that's at the 15th week before the expected week of childbirth, and they must give the required notice. The employee must be the biological or secondary adoptive parent of a child born or placed with them for adoption, or the partner of the mother or the intended parent if the baby is born through a surrogacy arrangement. And as I was just mentioning a moment ago, the actual rate of pay is the 151.97 per week, or the 90% of average weekly earnings, whichever is the lower. So hence why many people tend to take annual leave. Moving on from paternity leave, we now have what's known as parental bereavement leave, and this is probably it's one of the most recent pieces of employment legislation to be introduced, and it came into effect in April 2020, and it entitles all employees who are bereaved parents to a minimum of 2 weeks leave if they lose a child under the age of 18 or suffer stillbirth from 24 weeks of pregnancy. Now, it is a day one right, so it applies regardless of somebody's length of service. And again, the pay is dependent on meeting the eligibility criteria. Now, the focus of this is more about who has responsibility as a primary carer, and less so on the legal status between the adult and the child. And so the entitlement is available to adults with parental responsibility, such as adoptive parents, individuals who are fostering to adopt, legal guardians and foster parents. So it is a fairly new piece of legislation, and you know, it's there to support employees who go through that bereavement. And moving on to the parental leave element of family friendly, and this gives employees the right to unpaid time off to care for a child anytime before their 18th birthday. Again, it's dependent upon eligibility criteria, so they must have the 12 months continuous service and expect to have parental responsibility. Now, the 18 weeks is for each child over 18 years. However, the legislation restricts it so that an employee can only take up to the 4 weeks in each year. And the leave is prorated based on the normal weekly hours. So if you only work 3 days a week, one of your weeks is obviously 3 days. So it is prorated, and employers can ask for notice to be given up to 21 days before the required start date. And it must be taken in blocks of 1 week unless the child is disabled. And finally, one which is perhaps, I'd say, along with the shared parental leave, time off dependence can be tricky to manage. And it's perhaps one of the most trickiest because it involves looking at the circumstances and making a judgment on what's reasonable for the situation. And as we all know, reasonableness isn't defined in legislation. So this is why I think it probably can be quite hard and tricky to manage. But we do have pointers and guides that are within the legislation and from case rulings to help us. So time off for dependents is about giving employees a reasonable amount of unpaid time off work to care for or arrange care for a dependent. And it is an employment right from day one of service. It is time off work that's necessary to deal with an emergency affecting a dependent, so it can't be planned. So if an employee comes to you and says, I've got this situation that's happening in 3 weeks, I need to use my emergency leave, the legislation isn't in place for that. There were other forms of leave that can be taken. Now, the legislation sets out the standard categories for defining who is a dependent to an employee, and so that's your spouse, civil partner, child, parent, person who lives in the same household, obviously excluding people that are tenants, lodgers, or people that are employed by them. So there is a strict criteria. It is for providing, making arrangements for care for an dependent in an emergency situation. And it is intended to deal with those unforeseen matters and emergencies. Now, what's hard is that there's no set limit to the amount of time which can be taken. It will depend on the circumstances and what's reasonable. So you could have in the business 2 people off at the same time for different emergencies, and one having slightly different amount of time to the other. In most cases, I would say 1 day or even 2 should be sufficient for somebody to deal with an immediate emergency situation, and that's because of some of the case rulings that we know about. And it's about remembering that the time off is about making longer term plans. So you know, the situation may actually extend to a good 2-3 weeks, but that employee will only be entitled for that emergency leave for, say, 1 or even the 2 days. And then it's about trying to find arrangements for the remaining period as to how that dependent can get that support and care. So some examples of how the legislation can apply. You know, when a dependent falls ill, where they've been injured or been assaulted, a dependent gives birth, to deal with the death of a dependent, or to deal with an unexpected disruption or breakdown of care arrangements for a dependent. So it is quite tricky, and one that perhaps takes more thought and consideration when you're dealing with those requests. And now we're going to move on to flexible working, and obviously a further statutory right is for an employee to be able to request flexible working. And as I said at the start, it's not a leave entitlement per se, but it's important to consider this when discussing your statutory arrangements. So flexible working is the legal right to ask for flexible working. It's not an automatic right to have it. That's the big thing, and a lot of individuals or employees don't quite realise that, I don't think, but they have that legal right to put a request in and to ask. They do have to have at least the 26 weeks continuous service, and they can only put one request in per rolling year. Some companies broaden that and offer it from day one. And some companies also broaden on the statutory position and do accept more than one in a rolling year. It's a company decision that, but essentially the legislation only allows for an individual to put one in a rolling year. Now, as an employer, you're legally required to deal with that request reasonably. And generally it's considered a 3-month period is enough to deal with the whole end-to-end process, which would include any appeal stage. But and I say that, but it doesn't mean to say it gives you the green light to take that full 3 months to deal with it, because if you can deal with it quickly, you should. It's about being reasonable. But it's just perhaps where you get more of a complex case that takes more research from looking at the impact potentially on the business, that you do have a little bit of leeway to take the time you need to fully understand the potential impacts of it before you then respond. And as I said, that time frame generally is to include an appeal process as well. But ultimately, if you can do it quicker in a couple of weeks, you should be able to deal with it, and it should deal with it quickly. Now, as an employer, you can only refuse that request for one of 8 legally permitted reasons as set out in the legislation. You can't make reasons up that don't fall in line with the legislation. So just as a reminder, those 8 reasons for which you can decline a flexible working request is the burden of additional costs, the detrimental effect on the ability to meet customer demand, an inability to reorganise work amongst existing staff, an inability to recruit additional staff, where there perhaps is a detrimental impact on quality or even performance, or if there's insufficiency of work during the period the employee is proposing to work, and where there's any planned structural changes. So, you know, this is set out in the legislation, and when you're needing to decline for business reasons, you need to think about carefully the business reason and where that reason sits within these 8. And finally, we're just going to look now about the future statutory leave entitlements. You know, with there are several government consultations going through Parliament. We are likely to see some changes, and we are expecting to see some changes in regards to the flexible working regulations. We are expecting to see some new leave entitlements that look at supporting those who are carers and those who have children that are needing neonatal care after they're born. So these are the 3 areas that I think you know, we're going to be seeing changes. And if we look at the broadening of the existing flexible working regulations, then there is a government consultation going through at the moment, and it's looking at reforming flexible working. And I think what's prompted that is obviously the last 18 months in the pandemic, more and more people are able to work from home. It's been demonstrated that it can work, and actually it can bring many benefits in, you know, to organisations offering some kind of flexibility. So I think this has all prompted this consultation to come about. And interestingly, what the consultation is looking to explore is about, you know, can we make the right to request flexible working a day 1 right instead of having to have the 26-week service, whether the 8 business reasons that I've just gone through remain valid. The administrative process that underpins the whole right to request flexible working, you know, there is a burden there, but, you know, does there need to be any changes around that? Because, you know, there's a lot of effort that needs to go in to managing it. And also it's looking at whether we need to require an employee to suggest alternatives and requesting temporary arrangements. So that's quite an interesting one, and I do suspect that we will see some changes at some point around the flexible working regulations. So keep an eye out on that, and of course we will continue to update through our social media and website on those changes and the knowledge base, etc. We then have what's called a carers leave legislation that the government are committed to introducing. So the actual bill is called the Employment Caring Leave Bill. It's at its second reading stage, which is due to take place in February next year. And what this bill is setting out to do is provide unpaid carers to have the right to up to 1 week, 5 days of unpaid leave each year. And it would give those people the right from day one of service. And what we know from what we've seen so far on the literature around it is that the person they care for will broadly meet the definition of a dependent, as I've just explained for the time off dependence leave definition. And the person cared for would need to have a long-term care need, whether that's a physical or mental illness, injury or disability, or issues related to old age. And it's also proposing that that leave can be taken flexibly in either days or blocks of 1 week in a year. So as I say, that's at the second stage, and we'll hear more about that nearer February once it's got its second reading. And then finally, we are also going to be seeing neonatal leave, and that's going to be a new employment right for employees to receive leave and pay when a baby is born prematurely or sick and is in need of that care in a neonatal unit, because at the moment that time is obviously eating through the paternity leave that somebody's entitled to. So it's about giving somebody that standalone entitlement to neonatal leave. The statutory leave is likely to be capped at 12 weeks. The pay again will be dependent on eligibility criteria, and we're expecting that actually this comes into effect not until 2023, so some time away, but just to let you know, it's in the pipeline. And going back to some of the comments that Abby kindly shared at the beginning around the difficulties in being able to recruit at the moment, being able to retain our staff, it's really important at this point when we're trying to rebuild after COVID, to look at your family friendly policies as a whole now to see actually what can we do to help attract recruits to our organisation, what can we do to help retain our employees, by any of our family friendly policies. And you might even now want to introduce, not wait for any legislation, but introduce some form of leave, whether that's carers leave or neonatal, and make it as a company decision. Or as we've said at the outset, you might want to actually look at changing your flexible working rules so that you do give it to people from day one, rather than having them to wait the 26 weeks service, or even allowing, more than one in a 12-month period. So these are just interesting things that are going to be coming up, and it's probably a good time now for organisations just to have a look at their existing family friendly entitlements and consider actually, what can we do with these to make our workplace more attractive to job applicants and retain our employees and contribute towards employee engagement. So we're now coming over to the questions, and I'm going to now invite Abby to have a look through, see if I've had any questions come through.
Yep, so we've had one which was more of a personal situation, so I've privately answered that one, but another couple have come through, and one interestingly is just linked to what you've been talking about, Victoria. So it's more of a general question where a company is sort of struggling to recruit and so want to review their family friendly benefits to perhaps exceed statutory minimum payments. So hopefully this sort of webinar has come at quite a good time for reviewing the benefits package. And obviously family friendly is just one part of a benefits package. Lots of other things to be looking at, but seeing as that's our focus today, I think that's a really good initiative, and then clearly they've identified that there is added value to updating benefits as a way to attract and being an employer of choice. I know with some of the clients that I work with, they will look at, you know, diversity figures and see how many men have we got, how many women have we got, what the kind of ages, and do we want to encourage more women? Do we want to look at our leaver figures and attrition, exit interviews? That's always a good source of data if you do that. Because, you know, if people are leaving to go elsewhere to another company that does have a better benefits package, including family-friendly options, then I think that's a really good indicator that it's worth looking at.
Yeah,
What do you think?
absolutely, yeah. And I think, like I said a moment ago, with the pandemic, now is a time where many businesses are trying to rebuild and move forward and try and put the last 18 months in the past and actually recognise that flexible working, there's a lot of research and stats that show that people are wanting more of a flexible working workplace. Engagement is going to be key because you want to keep hold of your staff. You don't want to have to go through recruitment. If you do need to go through recruitment, you know, maybe you're fortunate to be creating some new vacancies, then you want the best people and you want to be able to attract the best people. And so your offering is really key. So I think, like you say, looking at your stats around your existing workforce is going to be important, because you probably want to get an idea of what your current costings are around all these family-friendly forms of leave, and then probably you know, build that business case to argue why it can add value to the business. And the costs. So cost out different scenarios and present those as part of your business case. Consider how they're going to be brought in, if they are going to be brought in, all these extra new changes before making any decisions. So, for example, if you've got somebody already on maternity leave, you know, what happens, you need to think of what point in time in the future or any new pay changes going to be made, so you don't get disgruntled employees who just miss out because they just weren't at that point in time eligible. And then think about the whole communication to your workforce, how you're going to be communicating that through your policies and your job adverts, your social media. You know, if you're sort of reviewing your whole benefits package and your family friendly piece in particular, then, you know, advertise that when you're using social media, when you're recruiting, you know, how you recognize that you're, you know, a very family friendly organization and this is what you can offer. So I definitely think it's a point in time where you can look at whether it will be adding value to your business and a way to help combat this, you know, move forward from the pandemic and rebuild.
Yeah, and just listening to you talking, then I was also thinking about consistency, because quite a few times I'll have employers come to me saying, I want to enhance our maternity offering, without thinking about doing the others as well, so the adoption, the paternity, and raising those up as well. So I think it's quite a good thing if you are reviewing the benefits package to look at it as a whole, because I think if you were to enhance maternity pay or leave and not do adoption and not look at paternity and even, you know, shared parental, that's another tricky one that comes into play. You know, if you're going to enhance maternity, do you then enhance it for the shared parental leave side of things as well? So I would say look at it as a whole and be consistent with them all, I think, for fairness, really. We've also had a couple of questions, more quicker ones really, in terms of parental leave. So one of the quicker questions on this topic was, with parental leave, is the year a calendar year? So under legislation, it is 12 months beginning on the date the employee first becomes entitled to take parental leave, I believe, yeah?
Yeah. So on the first date, they become entitled, and then it continues moving forward on that rolling basis thereafter. So it's not your strict January to December. It's basically when they become entitled to it.
That's it. And then the other one was, how can you know what parental leave an employee has already taken during their child's lifetime when they have only been with you for a short while? So, I mean, realistically, parental leave is sort of rarely taken because it is unpaid. And the legislation doesn't actually prescribe a set way to do this, does it?
No, not at all. And so I guess the things that come to mind is around your recruitment processes. So looking at your application for referencing process in order to obtain that data. So, you know, you could have a reference request letter that includes that as a standard question. You know, what's important is you ask it of everybody. So you have to build it into your existing processes. But you would look to probably at the recruitment stage obtain that information. That's the best, I guess, point in time if you think about the whole employee life cycle. So I'd suggest perhaps looking at your recruitment processes to build that question in. And as I said, just make sure you ask everybody.
Okay. A bit more of a tricky question for us here, Victoria, and that's on the topic of time off for dependents. How do we know what is reasonable, we come back to that word again, when somebody has a family emergency to deal with? Because I guess a family emergency to one person might be, you know, considered more serious than to another person. So that's a hard one, isn't it?
It is really, really hard as to what's reasonable. And I think we do know there is a case, I think it was John Morrison Solicitors, where we know that there's no limit to the amount of time off that the employee is limited to, first of all. So I think from other case rulings as well, we know that it can be just a few hours or it can be a day. Really, probably on the whole, most 99.9% cases, it's not going to be more than a day or two. I would suggest understanding from the individual when they make that first call in is to understand, you know, what the situation is, what care is obviously therefore needed, how is that dependent going to be getting the care, or, you know, and how long is that care needed for, to then understand what that employee's role is in providing that care, and, you know, what other family arrangements or family members may be around to help with that care, because the onus isn't necessarily all on that employee in general, unless obviously circumstances dictate it, because it might be that employee is the only person to provide that care. But it's having that conversation and not being scared to have that conversation when somebody phones in, because you're gathering that information to be able to then determine how much time off you can support. And, you know, as I said on the webinar, somebody might end up needing care that takes a few weeks. And so it's about having that conversation once you've understood the situation more, to determine whether you can support giving that day off, and then perhaps allow them to also then take some annual leave. They might to help contribute to that care that's needed. So it's looking at existing policies as well that you have in place that you could offer to balance it, rather than giving the whole time out as dependency leave, because it is truly for emergency situations and for that employee to try and find alternative care arrangements. You know, but do bear in mind, if people are single parents, if they haven't got family around them, if they you know, live pretty much not near family, or you know, those kind of circumstances. I don't know whether there's anything you want to add, Abby, on it, because it's very difficult to define, but they're the kind of things you want to think about. And as don't be afraid to have the conversation. I think my experience is sometimes people are afraid of asking those questions because they are personal questions, but you need to know how much time off work you can grant.
Yeah, no, exactly that. And you might find that you get a particular employee that you know, just is having a very difficult time and has more than one request for emergency time off. And really, it is all about communication and talking to that employee. If they're happy to talk to you and to raise issues that they're having at home and in their personal life, then that's them welcoming you talking to them about it. So it's fine to have the conversations of what is going on, what support do you need, but always drawing that line of, we are the employer, you know, there's only so much that we can do. I'm going to move us on to a maternity question. Again, probably one of the quicker ones, and that's, can I ask my employee for an appointment card for every appointment that they go to at the hospital? That sounds like perhaps an underlying little bit of frustration there. There isn't a legal requirement for this for every single time. It's just the first appointment, and really that's giving the company indication that the appointments have started. There are quite a few of them, and they're all vital to attend. So you need to be a little bit patient. But yeah, you can ask for notice. You can ask your employee to, you know, try and organise them at the best time possible so that they can go out on their lunch break or after work, but in the confines of, you know, a very difficult time in terms of NHS and being able to schedule appointments as and when they can. So, you know, if a company chooses to ask for proof, it must be consistent in asking the same thing from all of their employees. Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a good one here, Victoria, about what we've been going through in the last, I was going to say 12 months, but we've been enjoying the pandemic for more than that, haven't we? So how can I be sure my pregnant employee is taking sufficient breaks when working from home? Because I mean, we can do these Zoom calls, team calls, can't we? We'll sick to death of them, but when we can see people that way, but we're not getting all those sort of visual cues, are we, of just checking that people are looking okay, even if they're not sounding it.
No, and it's a really good question, and I think it raises a valid question around general employee safety and well-being for everybody, not just those who are pregnant. And risk assessments are essential for everybody. And obviously, with pregnancy, you have to look at your risk assessments more frequently, because as somebody progresses through their pregnancy, the risks change, and so you know, you have to regularly be looking at the risks. So I think your risk assessment process, having that in your diaries to periodically do it and review it, and have regular one-to-ones, you know, your normal monthly informal one-to-ones that hopefully perhaps you do, you know, find out how they're feeling, check in with them about their rest breaks, you know, remind them about good hygienic measures in terms of taking regular breaks, and just keep monitoring that. And, you know, good line management practices, you know, keeping notes, isn't it, of one-to-one meetings and things like that. So that would be essentially your record if you were to ever be challenged. But yeah, just make sure your risk assessment drives everything, and follow up and have those regular welfare questions, and asking the question about how you're getting on with taking breaks and things.
We've got another one that's come through. It says, thank you for a brilliant session. Thank you, whoever that was. And they've said, if my organisation is looking to increase our offer within our family-friendly policies, do we have any advice on how we advertise this when recruiting? Well, I would say very much the job advert is key here. I mean, you can include a job description on some job boards. You can include a benefits brochure. And I would really recommend, if you're about to recruit, have a look on the job boards and see what other similar employers in your field are putting on that job advert, so that you know how competitive you need to be, source the best candidates.
Yeah, absolutely. It's your advertising, isn't it? Talking to your recruitment agencies that you use about, you know, we've updated our benefits package, you know, this is what it entails, so that when they're having conversations with individuals, you know that they're relaying the most accurate and relevant information that you want them to. I think social media is amazing, isn't it, for getting your brand out there and selling your organisation. To think about those channels as well, and and hopefully word of mouth is always important. So, you know, if you've got your workforce that's engaged and is experiencing your family-friendly policies, you know, they're just going to shout about them, aren't they, positively to their friends and outside of work.
That's right. We'll have to stop the questions here, just
Okay.
looking at the time. I have got a couple more, so we might need to just handle those afterwards, Victoria.
Yeah,
There's
okay.
quite a few different scenario ones about paternity leave, shared parental, ones about, you know, same-sex couples and things like that. So we can cover that off afterwards, but I'll hand back to you so that we can close off the webinar on time.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you, Abby, and thanks for those questions. And thank you for submitting those questions, everybody. So we are now at the end of the webinar. So before we go, I would like to just run another poll, our final poll. And for those of you that have been on the previous webinars, you'll be familiar with this one. And it's really for us trying to find out how we can help you in your business. And if you would like us to contact you on anything in terms of our areas that we provide service to you on, whether that's HR services, HR training, our HR knowledge base, health and safety, services and training, and payroll. So I've just opened up a poll, and it would be grateful if you were interested to let us know, and then we can follow up with you after the webinar. And I'll make sure I'll follow up with those with the questions as well, by the way. So lovely. I'm going to just bring the poll to a close. Okay. And before we go, I just want to let you know about the training courses that we have. So we now offer ILM Level 3 in Leadership and Management. These are all conducted online for obvious reasons, and we have them rolling from November, takes us up to February, can you believe? And we also have ILM Level 5 in Leadership and Management, again online, and these start from January going through all the way till April. So they're designed for project managers, department heads, you know, ideal for developing skills and experience and prepare for senior management roles. Now, in terms of our HR management development, sorry, move ahead too soon. Let's go back. Development courses, we have many that we're offering online. 2 of them count towards your CPD points. So if you do, if you would like to come along and attend and take part, then please do get in touch. Again, they're online, and we have some coming up from the 19th of October. And then our webinars. So the next 2 that we've got scheduled, next one's menopause. So we're doing a lot of work this month because it's International Menopause Month this month, the 18th being Menopause Day. So next month we're going to follow up with a webinar, so please do come along and join us with that. And then we've got a recruitment one where we're joined by Reed Recruitment Agency. We're going to be talking about everything that's changed from a recruitment perspective. But we are going to be writing our next schedule, which will be launched in the next few weeks. Just to give you probably a heads up, it's probably going to look at some of the changes coming up for 2023 and key case rulings and things. So keep an eye out for our website, because we'll post those as soon as we've got them finalised. If you'd like to stay in the loop and be amongst the first to be invited to our webinars and receive our latest news, then please do sign up to our newsletter, which link is here, and you will all get copies of the slides afterwards. And that does conclude our webinar today. So if you do have any further questions, then please do contact us on the information on the screen showing now, and we'll be really pleased to hear from you. As always, we shall be sending a short survey to capture your feedback. We would really appreciate it if you could just spend a few moments just to complete that, because it really does help us to review what we're doing for you and look to constantly improve our services to you. And that brings today's webinar to a close. So I want to thank you all for attending. It's been great to have you join us. Thank you ever so much, Abby, for joining as well and giving us your insight to the family friendly. It's been really, really helpful. And thank you, Rebecca, as well, for any technical queries that may have cropped up. That's it for today, and we look forward to seeing you next month on our menopause webinar. So thank you, everybody, and take care.